Hello and welcome back to the back room. I'm Brett McNeil.
I'm Bob Uphues.
And we're live at Uphues with Louise Olivo-Kier. Louise is an Elmwood Park resident, and she's the longtime teacher of Triton College's basic birding class. That class is primarily organized around the spring migration. But we're here today on what is going to be, I guess, about a 93-degree
the worst fall
September
day ever.
fall day
Yeah.
To talk about the fall migration, the upcoming fall migration, and also talk about natural areas around Oak Park where you can take in the birds and other animals. So, Louise, thank you for coming, and welcome to Uphues.
Thanks very much. My pleasure being here.
Let's just start off right away and talk a little bit about the fall migration. It doesn't feel like fall yet. We're 23, 25 degrees above normal temperatures, but we should start to see some of the migratory birds that went to Canada and went up into the boreal forest this spring. They should be coming back. What should we be looking for? And maybe, I don't know, in September and then into October? Who's going to be coming through, and where might we see them locally?
Well, actually, the fall migration starts in August. You know, over Elmwood Park, around August 20th or so, the third week in August, I start hearing nighthawks flying, and those are one of the earliest species to head south.
Do we have
in August?
Do we have sort of resident populations of nighthawks? Because I see them in Oak Park all summer. I mean, it's when the sun is down, they're feeding
Yes.
aggressively near my apartment in Oak Park.
Yes, they are around, but I think maybe they're more active at that point because they're getting ready to leave.
And where do they winter?
I don't really know.
Somewhere else.
I have my bird book. I could look up on the range map,
No.
you know, but I
Um,
haven't.
So nighthawks,
that.
and then what next? What would be obviously people pay a lot of attention to the larger migratory birds like sandhill cranes. We'll see the cranes in the spring, and then at Jasper Pulaski Natural Resource, or whatever that is, a natural area in Indiana. That's
Yep.
kind of the fall stopping off point locally for
Right.
sandhills.
Well, the fall migration starts in August and goes all the way to November. I think shorebirds have been migrating, are some of the earlier migrants, and so they may have already passed through. And then we have all kinds of other small birds, warblers, vireos, you know, and some of the more spectacular things like tanagers and orioles and stuff like that. Gradually spaced out through September and October.
So
Could see different kinds of sparrows. Could see them at different times.
So the shorebirds, I presume, would be on Lake Michigan to find those kind of birds.
Yeah,
but
mostly.
What about if I don't really want to drive down to the lakefront and fight bears traffic or whatever it is? Where can I go locally, maybe along the Des Plaines River, and what might I see there? Would I be seeing these sparrows, or would I be seeing tanagers?
Yeah, you would. The Des Plaines River is a great resource, and we have forest preserves all along there, which is terrific. You know, we had some terrific planning of this area a long time ago. As a matter of fact, Chicago Audubon is going to have a bird walk at Thatcher Woods. I think it's October 7th. I brought
So
my
coming up.
paper, yeah. Trailside Museum, River Forest, October 7th, Saturday, October 7th at 7:30 in the morning.
So that's an Audubon walk. Well, I
Yep.
mean, it seems like,
But you could go there anytime,
yeah.
do your own walk, and you have to keep your ears open because mostly you're going to probably hear things before you see them.
And this is a challenge, I think, even for beginners for sure, but even an intermediate birder, it's unless you have a musical ear, and you're also a musician.
Also, yeah.
But unless you have a musical ear, it can be kind of tough to make out unless it's a crow. I mean, a bird call.
Yeah, but we creatures use our eyes more than our ears, but we use the ears to know that something is there, and then we look and try to find the bird by eye and be able to tell what it is by sight.
So what would be a good, I don't know, if you're going to head out, I mean, I think you really need to have a decent pair of binoculars, which Eagle Optics is where everybody buys them in Middleton, Wisconsin. They're not paying us for that. But, you know, maybe $100 or $150 investment or something if you really wanted to do it.
In that range, you can get really decent binoculars. If you go under $50, you're not going to get anything that's really worth having. But
Right.
So
100 or so, you can get perfectly fine binoculars for bird watching.
I am not a birder. I'm
It's okay, Bob.
Sadly, but I'm.
Can start anytime.
I'm interested, and as a beginner, kind of, what do I really need?
Mm-hmm.
Really, you need binoculars, and it would be good to have a bird guide.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the main ones for years has been
Peterson's.
Peterson's.
This is the Bible.
They're not paying me either, and it just.
And this is called Peterson's Field Guide.
The Eastern
to
Birds.
Eastern Birds.
To
Yeah,
eastern
okay.
birds, because the eastern half of the eastern 2/3 of this continent has a different set of birds than the western third.
Now, Louise is deprecating a little bit. I mean, let me answer your question. One thing I think you have to have as a teacher.
Mhm.
A lot of people who are very good at this at a young age have parents or grandparents who do this, but I really didn't learn birds until I took this class at Triton. And I think I've done 4 springs, something like that. 4 year time is flying by, but truly, in order to learn it, you can't sit with your nose in a book. You really have to have somebody who cares about teaching a little bit, and that can be a course. But also, there are bird clubs like the DuPage Bird. What are they? DuPage Birding, or I don't really know what they're called, but they have weekly walks. I think that's really where I would try to start, and that's why that Thatcher Wood walk that's organized by Audubon would be a great. Probably August, what do you say, October 7th? But that would be a really, really wonderful intro.
Yes, it would be. And anybody can go on the Chicago Audubon walks. You don't have to be an expert or anything. Anybody can go.
And I think that obviously would be a good introduction for someone that like me. I wouldn't even if my ears are open. I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking for because, quite frankly, as far as I know, there are robins and there are cardinals and there are sparrows, and that's basically it.
Right.
So that's the extent of the birds that I can identify.
I think that's probably pretty common.
Yeah.
I mean, it's maybe 5 or 6 birds that people are comfortable identifying,
Yeah,
and it's really a house sparrow.
Yeah,
right?
house sparrows. You would probably know pigeons,
Oh, yeah,
doves,
sure.
and crows.
Yes. Although not as many crows as there used to be.
But you would know
West
one
Nile
if you saw
decimated.
Yeah, right.
one. Or heard it. But
Yeah. So, in terms of you mentioned taking a class. Tell me about the class that you teach. When did that all start, and why did you?
And how'd you get into it?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, that class started. I first took the class in 1995. I had been seeing it in the Triton schedule for a couple of years, but it had been going on for years before that. There was Bill Fisher, who was a teacher at Riverside Brookfield High School and also a fantastic birder, taught the class through Triton for many years before I started taking it. So I started in 95, and I read through the whole book. That's just how I start learning things. And he was a terrific teacher. And also had a fantastic ear. He could hear stuff and know what it was. All the different bird songs and bird calls are like different languages. Each one's an individual language. 100 species of birds, 100 different languages.
Right.
So it's hard to keep that straight. But I started taking it in 95, and I just kept going every year. A lot of people take the course year after year because it's great fun.
When you took that course in 1995, to Bob's question, I mean, could you identify more than a handful of birds, or did you just have a natural interest in these things? Had you had any experience, or were you kind of more of a rank beginner, and then you went from there?
Well, I could identify the common birds. They had 2 handfuls I could identify, and red-winged blackbirds. My parents used to point that out if we would go for a drive, out away from the city.
Right.
I can remember my dad saying, "Look, red-winged blackbird sitting on a fence post,
Right.
next
Attacking
to the
somebody's
road."
head.
Right.
Yeah. So my parents just, would take us out and they would notice things and tell us about them. So the whole family was generally interested in nature and stuff. And the bird class just appealed to me so much.
So one thing
When I
I
came
mean,
up,
I think it
had
could
to
be a
join.
little intimidating to say that there are like 100 different languages, but maybe just beyond. And I think one of the things that I like about your course, and I wrote about this in a column for the paper this last year, is that it's not a competition to memorize the most field marks or to bag them, to fill out the list. And it's not a competition, but it's really much more of a learning exercise. What do you get out of birding beyond counting birds. I think that's really what I want to talk about.
I get a couple things out of it. For one thing, it's just so peaceful to go out and be listening to nature, hearing the wind, the leaves, the water, hopefully hearing the birds, and just concentrating on that rather than a screen or driving or, some kind of noise, some kind of loud noise. Whatever. Obviously, it's noisy in a wood, but it's very peaceful, very calming, and it's also a little challenge. It's also a little test of myself. Can I find the bird and can I identify it? And I feel satisfaction when I can say, aha, I know that's a warbling vireo over there and a red-eyed vireo over there. It's a combination of things.
I think one of the things that I've come to understand through birding is how little I knew going in. A woman that I work with told me that she never sees any birds except for pigeons and doves. And I said, that's because you don't recognize anything but pigeons and doves.
Yeah.
And it really is this sort of, it's a metaphor for me in some ways that you don't, not to be too Don Rumsfeldian, but you don't know what you don't know. I mean, if you are ignorant about the natural world, I mean, every little piece that you add to your knowledge, it's like something else then blossoms. And that's what birding is for me. It's a constant education in the natural world around us. And one thing that I'm really interested in is, I mean, we live in this flyover country, right? We don't have mountains, and people, I think, don't understand that we have really spectacular natural beauty here.
We do.
But you have to recognize it to see it.
Yep.
And where do you go to see it? What are your favorite places to go?
Well, there are several places along the lake which you can drive to when it's early in the morning on Saturday or Sunday. It's a lot easier to get there.
As long as there's not a
early
fun
are we
run.
talking?
Pretty early, Bob.
This could be a deal breaker.
This is one of the big deal breakers for most people in birding.
Well, the thing is, when the birds are migrating, the small birds actually fly at night because the big birds can't attack them at that point. And then in the morning they land and they start feeding to stock up. They've been flying all night. They're pretty darn hungry. So they land in the morning and then they're pretty active until about 10 o'clock, at which point they've eaten and then they hunker down. They sleep during the day. Then they wake up again in the evening and they feed again before they move on. So during migration, early morning and evening are the best times to see the most birds.
So early morning for us in the spring would be, I think we start our walks at 7. Is that right?
We start at 7 and we go till 10.
And we might drive as far as the Skokie Lagoons.
Yep.
So you're up at kind of an indecent hour.
Right.
Yeah.
So these places along the lake where you like to go are where?
Montrose Beach is a fantastic place, and they also have a whole nature sanctuary that they've built there called the Magic Hedge. There's a prairie restoration that's been worked on over the years, and within a very small space, a bunch of different habitats. There's the grassy prairie area, there are trees, clumps of trees and groups of trees, there's the beach, and then they also have a protected dune area for shorebirds to nest. And then, of course, there's the lake. Some birds are just
On the water.
on the water or flying over the water. So there's such a number of habitats right there that you can see a lot of different species of birds. But then another great place is Wooded Island, right behind the Museum of Science and Industry. And there are bird walks there twice a week. Wednesday mornings and Saturday mornings. And that's another place where, the parks, all the Chicago parks along the lakefront would be good, but those just have, special meaning to people. Oh, also at Addison and the lake is the Jarvis Bird Sanctuary, and that's about a square block area that's fenced off with a really tall fence and reserved for the birds inside. So every year we go there to see the black-crowned night herons.
And
Which
every
I
year,
never
and every
heard
year we
of
see them.
never heard of that until I took the course,
But to give you a sense of Montrose, I mean, this is a famous location in the Midwest for birding, but we go to, how many we'd take 7 or 8 trips. Is that what we do?
Six or seven trips.
We always go to Montrose.
Yep.
We probably see twice as many birds at that location as any other of our trips, except maybe Little Red Schoolhouse.
Yep.
So how many we see last year? 100. It was kind of weak. It was a little bit light, but in one year we
only
did
93.
Okay, but I mean we've hit like 130 something. I think
Not 130.
maybe 120. But I mean we've been high, much higher than 93.
Well, we've gone over 100, but not much over.
Okay,
100.
maybe I'm like a fisherman. We had like 150 birds pop. You can't believe the birds. I wouldn't want to name all of them.
Yeah, but we have had days where we
Yeah.
saw 55 species in 3 hours. 55 species of birds. That's a lot of birds.
I mean, crazy stuff like this won't mean it, but like a Virginia rail,
Yeah.
hiding in the bush, and then like Lincoln sparrows, just crazy stuff that you don't see every year for
Yeah.
sure.
And then as you move out into the suburbs, maybe out farther west, where your go-to places when you don't want to have to go all the way downtown.
Well, places along the Chicago River, the Des Plaines River. We have the forest preserves with a river or a marsh or lake. Those are terrific. The Little Red Schoolhouse down in the Palos Forest Preserves. That's another fantastic place with a variety of habitats and a small area and trails, and that's one of our favorite places.
Yeah,
they
there's
also have eagles nesting down there. For the past 5 years or so, eagles have nested in those woods in Palos.
And we saw them on the wing this year. I mean,
We did.
we saw bald eagles flying in Cook County. So
Well,
there are a couple nesting.
A couple of us
pair.
went to see the
Right.
nest as
you
well.
did?
We saw the nest. We saw little baby heads peeking up, and then a parent come and bringing them something to eat. It was
That's interesting
it was
because
so great.
a couple of years ago when we had we had a heavy snowfall and then a real deep freeze.
Oh yeah.
And all the rivers froze. Then when it started thawing, the Des Plaines kind of had some open water, and bald eagles were seen in and around Riverside, kind of regularly for a month or so, and that was like end of January into February kind of thing. And I assumed that they had come from the north seeking some open water, but apparently they're actually in the area.
Yep.
That's
There's some
interesting.
around.
But they are coming down, and this is so every year on the Illinois River at Starved Rock, the DNR puts on this Eagle Days kind of event. And last year, I mean, there were like 6 eagles. It was insane because there was so much open water up north.
Right.
So what the eagles that you saw in Riverside are probably like Lac de Flambeau eagles or
Okay.
something like that. Rhinelander eagles,
That's pretty amazing.
and they will come all the way
Yeah.
down. You'll also see at Sauk City in Wisconsin. Anywhere there are dams where
Right.
the water stays open, you'll get large concentrations of eagles. And now, I mean, out at Rock Island, I mean, they have a gigantic eagle population.
On the Mississippi?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
All winter.
Yep.
That's
And these
the-
are like the size of dogs.
Yeah.
They're huge.
That's
Yeah.
the only place I've actually seen bald eagles in person. It was actually in Cassville, Wisconsin, which
Sure.
is in southwestern Wisconsin. And I will have to admit that the ones that came to Riverside that winter, I was the only person who didn't see them. I would drive
you're
down.
not the only
I'd
one.
drive down Fairbank Road and Blooming Bank looking for these things, and everybody else saw them in town. I didn't see them.
Well, you're building your skills, Bob. And,
Yeah.
you'll become more observant with even the big birds.
Yeah.
So, how about closer to where you live? What are your go-to? I gotta get a birding fix in, and I only have a certain amount of time. Where do you go?
Well, there's one fantastic place, which is an Illinois nature preserve. It's the Wolf Road Prairie.
Yeah.
So
sure,
I
yeah.
actually I work at York Road and 22nd Street,
Yeah.
and so a mile and a half or so in each direction at 31st and Wolf is this Wolf Road Prairie. It's a protected area by the state, and it's fantastic. And they've been working on prairie restoration in there as well. And it's just, there's traffic on 2 sides, a lot of cars, and it's just a little piece of magic. You go in there and you start listening in the direction of the prairie and the birds, and then you kind of don't hear the cars and stuff like that. Sometimes I go and I stop there in the morning before I go to work, and I have to rip myself away to go to the office. It's really hard.
And we do that as a side trip for woodcocks in the spring.
We do. We do.
So woodcock, and you've talked about seeing woodcocks there at other times, I think. But
Yeah.
are there other birds that specific to? And I'm interested in talking about the Wolf Row Prairie a little bit. This will be the second time we talk about Judy Bart Topinka, who had a huge role in preserving that piece of land over much objection in Westchester. Like John Cindy hated that, and tried very hard to get it developed. And then there's a very strange ghost residential community immediately west of there. Do you know about this? It's off of Wolf, like the access point was off of 31st Street.
Well, I know
Yeah,
they're
31st.
But they're like large homes that
Yeah,
are
they're-
empty. It looks like a zombie apocalypse.
Really?
I didn't realize that.
Yes.
I know there was a
Something
there's
happened.
There's a residential area there. We're getting totally off the subject.
know,
here,
but with
there, because that was a residential area where they would have these elaborate Christmas light displays every year.
This is immediately west of Wolf Row Prairie.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, right. Yeah, but those were more like little ranch houses and so on. But I'm not familiar.
Do you know anything about this? Like about the
I
end of
don't-
that residential community? I
I
think there
don't know about
there was
that.
litigation. Maybe that's another
I
conversation.
just
we
know
got,
I've
but-
walked over there. You can just walk you can walk through the prairie, you can walk the west.
Mhm.
You can see these big fancy houses with giant lawns. I never had the guts to go, walk up to the house and see
Well,
what
they look
was
totally
going
derelict.
Well,
on.
now I have to. Now
You
I have
know.
to go check that out.
It's really interesting.
But
Okay.
it's from like Hunt Club Lane or something.
think that's
off
right.
Yeah,
31st,
okay,
right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
one cool thing about the Wolf Row Prairie, though, I mean, around here we've got a lot of crushed limestone trails, or however we access the woods. But there, it's really like footpaths back there, except for
Well,
the sidewalks that
sidewalks.
they put in.
Yeah, because it was originally going to be a development back in the 1920s or 30s or something. And they put in the sidewalks. They laid out where the streets were going to go. They put in the sidewalks, and then they ran out of money or something. And
Then I think the Depression
never,
sank
never
it.
built anything.
Right.
And the sidewalks remain. So those are the trails.
So woodcocks
most
there.
of it.
Any other? I mean, if you were gonna, jump in a car after watching this video blog and say, I want to go to the Wolf Row Prairie, what might you see there this fall that would be
You would-
recognizable? And
Well, you'd always see red-winged blackbirds.
Which I thought only existed in Wisconsin when I was a child, because that's the only place I would ever see them. So I had no idea they were anywhere else.
Yeah.
I thought they were native and exclusive to Delavan, Wisconsin.
when I used to live off the Ike in South Oak Park, and right on that barrier wall that hems in the Eisenhower,
Yeah.
it gets marshy down there. There's a reed bank, and there were red-winged blackbirds there, and they would fly up and perch on the guardrail, saving cars from plummeting off of South Boulevard or whatever
Right,
that is
yeah.
there.
Well, I've seen them many times get off the Eisenhower at First Avenue and just waiting for that light. And they're right there
That's right.
in the trees and the walls, right there next to the highway. Give them a little teeny patch of
Well,
of
and that's another thing is that there are
plants,
these.
and they'll live there.
There are animals that we live with not just the migratory birds, but I mean as cardinals. They really live. They are part of our communities.
They absolutely are.
What other? I think you guys just have a story about coyotes in the journal.
I don't know that
This
we
is
had
something that,
a story,
comes
but
up.
I mean, right? It comes up a lot. I mean, in Riverside, it's a big deal because there was a run in 2013 or 2014 where there were so many coyote sightings in this one particular area in Riverside that it was. There were like 300 coyote sightings in this one, and
Wow.
it wasn't on the edges of Riverside. It was right in the middle of a residential area in the north part of Riverside. I wrote a story about that because there were familiar coyotes that people would see all the time. So there are those as well.
Yeah. I've seen coyotes in the middle of a cemetery in Chicago, north at Narragansett and Addison. There
Oh,
are
sure. That's
couple
like
of cemeteries.
Mount Olive.
Mount
or
Olive,
something.
That is
right,
Mount
right.
Olive.
Driving past there one afternoon, a Sunday afternoon or something, 2 p.m, a field in the cemetery, and there was a coyote just laying there, taking it easy.
Mhm.
We were birding. My
People
wife.
going by.
Yeah, they're
you know?
totally habituated to us
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
We were birding in Forest Home Cemetery last spring, coyote
Oh,
ran,
I'm sure
but
there are
like
coyotes
between
all over
us,
the place there. Yeah.
lope right along.
Yeah.
And I guess that's another thing I would say. Do you bird the local cemeteries at all? We have a
yeah,
classmate
sometimes-
that does.
Yeah,
but-
sometimes cemeteries are terrific places for birds because there's open space,
Mhm.
plants, some little peace and quiet. It's not overrun by humans.
Well, especially the ones in Forest Park, which run along the river as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
Correct.
So that
Fantastic
yeah.
too.
Does anybody lead a cemetery bird walk?
Yes, they have bird walks in the Rose Hill Cemetery in Chicago.
But not out
sometimes.
here. Maybe that's a to-do list item. I don't know.
Yeah,
That's
right.
kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about? There's a bird count activity coming up in October that the Forest Preserve District of Cook County is putting on. They've really embraced birding. There was a big bird initiative last year.
Mm-hmm.
What do you? And it seems like they're here in River Forest, but it seems like they have really made some outreach in the last, I don't know, maybe it's a decade or something. But to birders, they renovated Camp Sagawau and made that phenomenal. What do you think about the Cook County Forest Preserve District's relationship with amateur birders and providing opportunities to get people into the forest preserves and learn about it?
Yeah, I think that's fantastic that they're doing that. And the more people they can get interested, then the more support they'll have for, preserving the preserves and having people use them, getting all different kinds of people interested in birding and being out there. I think it's wonderful, They make a little contest out of it. I think that draws people in more.
Yeah.
That's some of the other aspects. Like I said, the other aspect of birding is a little challenge that I do for myself. Some people do have their lists, and I keep lists of what I see, but it's not a super contest with anybody,
Well,
But there's that little contest aspect of it that would draw some people in. So that's a wonderful thing.
Well, that leads naturally to, of course, what I'm thinking is like, what is your crowning birding glory that you, it's like, hey, I've seen this, guys. You guys have not. And I have. And
Right.
what's your? And then I guess the second thing would be, what's the holy grail that you haven't
What's
bagged yet?
Which one has to be seen as a bucket list bird?
Well, I have my best birding site was in that cemetery, the Mount Olive Cemetery, in Narragansett and Addison. I was there once walking around by myself, and I saw a red-tailed hawk on the ground with its wings out like this, and it was moving around a little bit, and so I realized it had something.
Mm-hmm.
It had caught a squirrel, I guess. And it was, they call it mantling, where it's got its wings spread out like this so the thing can't run away before it kicks the bucket, So here's this big bird on the ground, and then two raccoons come waddling up, and the bird lifts off and flies away because
He gave up the prey,
Yeah.
so they poached his squirrel.
Well, they were trying to do it, but then I was there, so I
Oh, you intervened.
I intervened. I did. I was about
Wait a minute.
I was about a half a block away, so I started walking toward them, and then I started yelling. I didn't want to get too close or anything while they were eating, but I started yelling, "Hey there!" And as I got closer, they finally left. So then I went to look for the hawk. It didn't look like it was flying away very fast, so I went up to where the poor squirrel was, and then I turned the direction the hawk went, and I'm walking along the row of graves, and then I look over here, and the second row of tombstones over there, there's the hawk. And they have some big ones, so it was up high, There's that hawk right there, and I froze. And I put my binoculars up to my eyes in case it came after me. At least I couldn't get my eyes, Which it didn't come after me, but I could.
It
I
should
was
have been
right
thankful.
there. It should have been.
Yeah.
I was right there, 20 feet from it. I could see every little feather. It was fantastic.
Okay.
I looked a little bit, and then I backed away, left, and hopefully it went back and got the squirrel. That was my best.
Well, it was appropriate that
Sighting.
it all happened in a cemetery. So that's good.
Yeah.
Actually, now that I mention it, there was a hawk in my backyard last weekend. I look out the window, sitting at the kitchen table, look out the window, and I don't know what kind of hawk it was, but it was a hawk. And it wasn't gigantic, but it was sitting, looking into, we have this little stand of daisies, kind of,
What was in
poking
there?
around, and then he went in to the daisies and then flew out and sat up on the fence, and you could see he was picking stuff. He was, there were feathers flying, and then eventually it was a little bird.
Yeah.
You think it was a
that he
Cooper's
had
hawk?
got.
Probably.
Cooper.
Okay.
They hunt birds.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, and then he flew into the next door neighbor's yard and started flipping it around, and playing with it, and
Right. Like a sadist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen, standing waiting for the train in the morning here in downtown Oak Park, I've seen a Cooper's hawk chase a pigeon
Mm.
on the wing. And that is some very good aerial combat. Really, really fun.
Neat.
And
So what? Okay, so that was your best birding moment. So what is the holy grail that you never have? Maybe you heard it, but you didn't see it, or the one that you can finally rest easy knowing you've seen.
I really want to see a pileated woodpecker.
wow.
I've seen them once on the road. They were so far away I could hardly even see them with the binoculars. I mean, I have seen them technically, but they do live in the Palos Forest Preserves, and we're down there every year, and I haven't gotten a good look at one of those.
That's
I
kind
wanna
of
see
every
that.
spring. This is the last trip of the spring, and this is like a big push is to try to get the pileated woodpeckers.
Yeah.
But I've seen them. I've seen 3 in a clump of those in Door County. Just you walk right up to them.
Neat.
Yeah, they're huge. They're like the size of a crow.
So Brett just one-upped you.
No. But like,
Everybody has
but
their
what
own
she's
thing.
saying is like to do it here. I
Right.
had to
Yeah.
drive 5 hours,
Yeah.
and it's a little bit different
Right.
geography there.
Yeah.
So one thing about birds and just having your eyes open to it, cedar waxwings. We saw some cedar waxwings out in DuPage County two springs ago or something like that, and I think I had seen them. This is a spectacular bird that is pretty common, relatively common.
Relatively common, but not right here in the
Yeah.
city. But
And-
I do have a serviceberry tree out in front of my house, which is a native tree and gets berries that birds like, including cedar waxwings. And 2 years ago, I was in my living room, and there was a cedar waxwing right in the tree outside my window.
I mean, a spectacular
It's
bird.
fantastic.
And I would have, and if we weren't out there and I didn't have binoculars and I didn't have people sort of explaining what it was that I was seeing, I would have looked right past it. And now it's a bird that I see pretty regularly.
That's good.
And I'm always reminded of, one, how beautiful they are, but two, having to have the facility to recognize it, in order
Right.
to enjoy it.
Right.
That's just been a big thing for me.
That's true.
Couple things. Bird collision monitors. This is something that people do downtown, but there's also been some local press about bird collisions in the library.
Yeah, the giant expanses of glass and
that are killing birds, and I
flying.
actually see them. I mean, I'll see songbirds on the ground if I go over there to drop a book off early enough in the morning. There'll be a couple
Really?
dead songbirds on the sidewalk. Yeah. Is that something that you're involved with at all? And do you have an opinion about whether or not the Oak Park Public Library should be doing more, or just sort of generally this issue in the suburbs? Bird collisions.
I think it is an issue. I was actually checking out. Chicago has a lights out initiative they've had for years, mostly focused on the big buildings downtown and along the lake and stuff like that. And here's an article that says that it's important for buildings that are 40 stories or buildings that are sort of, not in a clump of other big buildings, 20 stories tall. But you said the Oak Park Library is having it, and I think that I had a bird collision just a couple days ago. I work in Oak Brook, and the building's only 5 stories, but it's kind of on a hill and nothing else around. And I was working late, and then I heard a thunk on the window. I think I was the cause of a bird collision.
Because your window was on? You
Because
shouldn't be
my
working
light-
so late, Louise.
I shouldn't be, but
Well, and now in Oak Park, we've got now 2 pretty tall. I don't know if they're necessarily isolated glass
But
towers. in
this is
downtown Oak
the
Park.
Vantage.
Yeah, Vantage in is it the Emerson? Is
Oh,
that what
yeah.
they're calling it?
right around the corner.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, I just saw that.
maybe that's another source where that might
Yeah.
happen.
It could happen there. And it doesn't have to be a huge building either, because I've had two really good birds in my yard, dead.
Mhm.
I have a solar room on the back of the house. I mean, my house is like a city lot, it's a 30-foot wide lot
Sure.
with a little yard. But one time there was a hairy woodpecker in my yard, which is it's not that common. It's not a rare bird, but it's not that common.
Right.
And another time, a cuckoo.
Wow.
And these are birds that had flown into the glass and,
Died.
died. So it happens even,
So I know that a friend of mine does bird collision monitoring, and I know they were recruiting for Oak Park. I don't know if that what ever became of that. So maybe we'll hear some more. Maybe there'll be some press, or somebody will approach the Journal about it.
yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the upcoming walk in Thatcher Woods. Maybe just some Chicago Audubon, DePage birders. We're going to have to wait for Triton. We have to wait until the spring of next year. But so before we go, any other opportunities for people to get involved with a group activity or a structured activity this fall? And then how do they find you? How do they find us for Triton next spring?
Well, the Chicago Audubon Society has a couple different bird walks at different places around the city. Their website is chicagoaudubon.org, and they have a calendar of events. Then there's an Illinois Ornithological Society. They do some walks. DuPage Birding Club, as you said. There are some people who kind of organize themselves, but I guess it's not so easy to find them. But
Right.
there's also there's Illinois Birding, not blog, what would you call it, bulletin board.
Would you Google that, or is there an
Yeah.
address for it? Or Okay,
it'll
well-
come to me. Anyway,
And I'll personally say I've gone on those walks in Jackson Park, and I
Uh-huh.
found those to be very welcoming and also really productive.
Yep.
And very
Yep.
very nice people, and frankly, if you're under 60 years old, they're very happy to see you. Generally speaking, because this does skew a little bit toward the older, but
Yeah, it does.
you're a little bit of a celebrity. Young people, if you want to get into birding, people
Yeah.
will care. All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time
Yeah,
on
thanks. This
a
was,
Sunday
a lot
to
of
come
fun.
and talk birds. And let's do it again next spring.
okay.
Okay. Thanks,
We
Louise.
will.
Thanks.
Thank you.